Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening up a topic that is it's just foundational to modern healthcare. We're talking about biologicals.
Right.
So, vaccines, antitoxins, immune sera, all these powerful tools that kind of paradoxically involve putting something foreign in your body to protect it.
It's a fascinating concept.
So, our mission today really is to give you a clear breakdown of chapter 18. We want to get into how the body actually achieves resistance, the difference between immediate protection and that long-term memory.
And the nursing role in all of this. The
Yeah.
safety aspect is huge.
Absolutely non-negotiable.
And it really boils down to one fundamental question, doesn't it? Are we trying to teach the body to fight for itself later?
Right.
Or are we just giving it the weapons to fight right now? And that's your split. That's active versus passive immunity right there.
Okay, so let's start with that first one, the long game, active immunity. This is what we're usually aiming for.
That's the ideal, yeah.
It's the process where the body gets exposed to a specific antigen, and in response, it starts building. It creates plasma cells, antibodies, and the most critical part, these memory cells.
The memory cells are everything. They're like the body's intelligence archive. So if that same protein, that same antigen, shows up again,
The alarm bells ring.
instantly. And the response is so much faster, so much more powerful. And that's why we tend to label active immunity as, lifelong.
But the sources bring up a really interesting point here. That lifelong label, it's not exactly permanent, is it?
Not static at all. That's the dynamic nature of the immune system. The textbook example is smallpox.
Ah, right.
Once we eradicated the disease, we stopped vaccinating. And what studies found was that, years later, without any kind of stimulation.
Not even low-level exposure.
Exactly. The
Yes.
antibody protection it faded. The memory cells might still be there deep down, but the antibody levels drop off a cliff. It's a system you have to maintain.
So if active immunity is the long-term investment, then passive immunity is, what, the emergency cash withdrawal?
That's a great way to put it, yes. It's the urgent intervention. You're not waiting for the body to build anything. You're injecting ready-made antibodies, immune sera, directly into someone who's at high risk right now.
And the key difference is there are no memory cells being made.
None. The immunity is totally temporary. It only lasts as long as those antibodies you injected are circulating. It is, quite literally, a borrowed defense.
Which brings us to immunization itself. That's the process of artificially stimulating that active immunity.
Using vaccines or toxoids, yeah. You're introducing a weakened or altered protein so the body can learn from it, can build those memory cells without having to go through the actual disease.
But when we use that other path, passive immunity, injecting foreign proteins, there's a potential cost. Let's talk about serum sickness.
Yes, this is fascinating. The very immune system you're trying to help eventually looks at the life-saving antibodies you injected and says, wait a minute, you're not from around here.
And it attacks them.
It attacks them aggressively. And the symptoms are not mild. You're talking about fever, arthritis, serious muscle pain, myalgia. It's the ultimate trade-off. You get immediate protection from something that your body will ultimately reject.
Okay, so moving more into that active immunity camp, what's actually in a vaccine?
Well, they contain protein antigens. They can be either chemically inactivated or maybe live but weakened viruses or bacteria, just enough to trigger that long-term response.
And the sources are really clear about toxoids being a specific type of vaccine.
Right. With a toxoid, you're not using the germ itself. You're using the poison, the toxin that the germ makes. But it's been altered, so it's not dangerous anymore.
So for something like tetanus, you're building immunity to the toxin, not the bacteria itself.
Exactly. You're protecting against what makes the bacteria so deadly.
Now, when we look at this across the lifespan, the practitioner's role really changes. For kids, immunization is standard, but it's more than just the shot.
Oh, absolutely. It's parent education. It's reassurance. It's talking about comfort measures.
And those comfort measures are so important. Warm soaks, acetaminophen for a fever, but there's a huge warning flag here we need to come back to.
The aspirin warning. Yes. Crucial.
So for adults, the schedule is just as important for public health. We're talking annual flu shots, the tetanus booster every 10 years.
And that tetanus shot is often given with a pertussis booster now, the Tdap, plus the pneumococcal vaccines.
And the source specifically mentions the pneumococcal 13-valent vaccine. Why is that specific detail, 13-valent, so important?
It's because the valent tells you how many strains of the bacteria it protects against. The 13-valent formulation targets, 13 of the most common and dangerous strains.
Yeah.
For older adults who are at such high risk, getting that one and the yearly flu shot It's just non-negotiable.
Now, we can't talk about vaccines without touching on the controversies. The sources tackle them head-on, starting with the MMR vaccine and autism.
And the science on this is just crystal clear. Bodies like the Immunization Safety Review Committee have looked at this again and again.
And found nothing.
No evidence, no linkage. And the thing is, the original study that started this whole fear from 1996, the British Medical Journal officially declared it fraudulent. That is a huge deal. It's a rare and severe step for a journal to take.
It just shows how powerful misinformation can be, even when it's completely debunked.
It really does.
Then on a different note, there's the HPV vaccine. This was a massive breakthrough.
The first vaccine against cancer. I mean, think about that.
It's incredible. It targets HPV types 16 and 18, which cause about 70% of cervical cancers.
And the key takeaways for you are, 1, it has to be given before infection. That's why it's targeted for ages 9 to 26. And 2, even with the vaccine, annual pap smears are still absolutely necessary. It doesn't cover all the cancer-causing strains.
Finally, the sources touch on a darker topic, biological weapons. They specifically mention anthrax and smallpox.
Right, and it's really about preparedness. With anthrax, we have a vaccine, so it's mostly for the military, and we have treatments like ciprofloxacin. Smallpox is, well, it's the nightmare scenario.
Because it's so transmissible.
And the mortality rate is up to 30% in people who aren't vaccinated. The vaccine itself uses a live virus, so it carries its own risks. And while there's no proven drug treatment, the source does note that Stovir has shown some promise in vitro.
So when you hear in vitro, you need to think in a lab.
Exactly. It works in a test tube. We don't have the broad human trials yet. It just underscores how serious a reemergence would be.
Okay, let's shift back to the passive side, to those immediate therapies. The terminology here is key.
It is. The main umbrella term is immune sera. That's just preformed antibodies against a specific virus or bacteria, like hepatitis B immune globulin, which you'd get after an exposure.
And under that umbrella, we have subgroups, like antitoxins.
Right. Those are antibodies aimed specifically at the toxins made by bacteria. Botulism antitoxin is a perfect example.
And then antivenins,
which are for bites from poisonous snakes or spiders. They contain antibodies against the venin.
So their use is pretty straightforward. Provide immediate passive immunity.
Yep, either as prophylaxis after you've been exposed, especially if you're immunosuppressed, or just to make an active disease less severe. The prototype is immune globulin, given intramuscularly for things like hepatitis A, measles, varicella. It's a temporary shield.
But because you're injecting foreign proteins, the cautions are pretty high.
They are. A history of a bad reaction in the past is a huge red flag. You also have to be very careful if the patient has any coagulation defects or thrombocytopenia, basically any bleeding or clotting issues.
Which all leads to the most important part of this whole discussion, the practitioner's role in safety. This is the so what.
This is the bottom line, yes. Before you give any of these, you have to run down the universal contraindications list.
And that list is all about preventing 2 bad outcomes, either causing the disease itself or a severe allergic reaction.
Exactly. So number 1 is immune deficiency. Giving a live, weakened virus to an immunocompromised person could cause the full-blown disease.
Other big ones are pregnancy, any known allergies to the components like eggs for some vaccines.
And you have to check if they've had blood or blood products in the last 3 months. That can interfere with the response.
So after that baseline, check temperature, skin, perfusion, you monitor for effects. Most are common, right? Fever, chills, some pain at the injection site.
That's just the immune system firing up. That's what you expect. But the real safety priority, the thing you absolutely must have ready.
Epinephrine.
Always. You have to have emergency equipment, including epinephrine, on standby. A severe hypersensitivity reaction is rare, but it can be catastrophic.
And we have to just hammer this point home. Vaccines are preventative. You don't use them to treat an active infection.
It's all about preparation, not reaction. And speaking of safety, let's circle back to that aspirin warning for kids.
Yes, this is so critical.
You can give supportive care rest, acetaminophen, a warm compress, but you never, ever administer aspirin to a child for discomfort after an immunization.
Why is that rule so absolute?
Because aspirin, when given to a child who's having a viral response or an immune reaction, can increase the risk of Reye syndrome. It's a rare but incredibly dangerous disorder that causes swelling in the liver and brain. It's a completely preventable risk.
The practitioner's job really ends with patient teaching then.
It does. You have to provide a written record, make sure they understand the timing for any booster doses, like for the HPV series.
And you encourage them to report any adverse effects. That documentation is key for public health.
Absolutely.
So, to bring this all together, you should now have that essential distinction down cold. Active immunity from vaccines means long-term memory. Passive immunity from Sera means temporary, immediate protection.
And for both, safety checks are paramount.
Yeah.
Allergy screening and having that epinephrine ready. But the takeaway, I think, is that we rely on these things throughout our lives. And if
Ah.
you look around, you see so many adults who let basic things slide. The 10-year tetanus booster, the annual flu shot, it highlights a real challenge.
So here's the final thought for you to consider. What does our ongoing reliance on these preventative biologicals, which are sometimes costly, sometimes controversial, but always potentially life-saving, imply about the balance between, say, individual choice and public health policy? It's a conversation that requires practitioners to be experts in more than just the medicine.
It's the science, the history, and the social context of it all.
That's our deep dive into the world of biologicals. We hope you feel thoroughly equipped with this knowledge. Until next time.